credit high right now. I heard concerns from my golf partner, Andy, yesterday that, projects are being developed more with RINs and the renewable fuel standard than they are with the LCFS right now. In the near term, what can we do? What should we be doing to help the RNG interest where it is right now?
I think it means looking at the problems that we're actually solving upstream with RNG, because it's enabling.
Like what are you thinking about?
I mean, I can self-serving, but of course, from a food waste perspective, but producing. So how do you take those upstream solutions that you're able to unlock with RNG? And if it's pulling methane out of the atmosphere, we should be thinking about the benefits of pulling methane out of the atmosphere more, rather than what is the RIN price.
Oh, you listened to my presentation.
I did.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So when you're looking at, and from our perspective, for every MMBTU of fuel that we produce, we are able to donate, it's the equivalent of donating 50 meals per MMBTU, because we're building out infrastructure, we're driving awareness. When you pull food waste out of the waste stream, folks look at food differently. They start to appreciate what they're throwing away. We're able to rescue some of that food. We're putting it back onto plates. And the only reason why we can do that is because there's value in RNG. And so those downstream markets on RNG, the better they understand how they're helping to participate and unlock these things, I think it's easier for us to construct and drive the value of RNG.
So as you think a lot of it is in terms of the messaging and helping people to understand, it's not just about building systems. It's not just about creating vehicle fuel, because that's what the LCFS and RFS are. It's about getting people to care about the upstream benefits.
Look at additionality, I think, is a step in the right direction. So when you get additionality by virtue of, if we buy your gas, that means you're going to be able to build this and do this thing. And whatever that thing is, it's obviously at its core is anaerobic digestion, whether it's purposeful or it's happening within the ground. That additionality, I think, is very important. So how do you bring that value proposition to the US rather than just existing within Europe? And maybe that helps Randy with the smaller landfills. We can't do anything. The economics don't work unless somebody's willing to pay a premium for that fuel.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, I think Ryan's story is awesome. I think just there's nothing bad about what Ryan is doing. It's all positive and good things, and it's great for kind of advocacy and messaging, which is fantastic, which is why I like to go to DC with Ryan. It helps. But so there is the advocacy and influence piece, but I also think about I also like to think about what we can do. And I think there's a lot more on the we side. And when I talk about that, I mean by capital efficiency. There's a lot of inefficiency in the way we build these plants today. And that was really a lot of the vision of what Archaea was built on, was the standardization and modularization of the plants.
Where are the biggest opportunities there for capital efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, we're just scratching the surface. So right now we have three.
Just an example, yeah.
So we have three standard plants right now. We have a small, medium, large. We have a 1 mega site, and we're going to build a couple more. But those three designs, getting those so that you really are off the shelf. The engineering is complete. The packaging is done. The fabrication is standard. And it truly is kind of a plug-and-play system that you can put on a landfill and operate in a flexible way is a game changer. And getting that.
And this isn't just an idea, right? This is something that you're actually executing.
It's absolutely. We're executing.
You figured out how to do small, medium, and large based on the projects that
we have. And we brought online 2 small plants and 1 large one so far. 1 of the medium, 1 on in June.
Because there's a lot of people that want to. It's so hard with biogas systems of all kinds. It's so hard to do a cookie cutter because every system ends up having its own fingerprint, right? Because you've got different input, you're just different situations, right? And so people have talked for years about trying to standardize. I think we sat up on the stage in Chicago talking about how we standardize things. So how are you able to have some success in creating that standardization, the modularization with your systems? What unlocked for you all?
So again, the vision, not mine. It was what we bought when we bought Archaea. But if I look back at my history, so previously, this is kind of 6 jobs ago, I was in charge of our global hardware for subsea for offshore across the globe. And that was a big thing around standardization. So I've been a huge believer in standardization and modularization for years now. And that was tough. Back then, if you looked at the offshore industry, the idea that you could standardize subsea development was unheard of. And we did it. And so similarly, this is a very different application, but it's the same concepts. And to do it, you have to think about what's the end use. How do you, again, engineer, package, construct, commission, and operate in a way that's repeatable? And it's that small, medium, large, and we're also working on an extra small to address some of the things that Randy mentioned. But the only way you can drive capital efficiency and really get to a place where you're efficient at execution, project management, and really developing these in a fast, expeditious, capital efficient way is through standardization. There's no other way.
If I could, I'll probably get kicked by our head of interconnects, Tony Reimer.
This is going to be good. All right.
He can do it
Tony,
now.
you wanna come up?
I think standardizing interconnects, I think when you work with so many different utilities across the country, standardizing that skid, the gas quality, the requirements makes that process easier, the paperwork, the requirements, the difference between PG&E and Lexington Gas.
Worlds apart.
That would be a nice ask for Tony.
All right. Are you guys in the same boat?
I can just say ditto, but yeah. So we developed our standard designs a couple of years ago. Similar story to STARS, which is kind of a small, medium, and large approach, and it's helped us to pre-order equipment so that we don't face supply chain delays. It's helped us with with cutting some of our costs and being more efficient with our capital. And it's helped us get permitting. We can submit permitting sooner. And so I think everybody in this room probably just sighs a little bit when I talk about permitting and the time it takes to get things permitted.
It's painful, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so if you've got those standard designs ahead of time, if you've already got a 30 or a 60% design, it helps you move that process along much quicker. And that's what I think Charlie was alluding to when you're talking about optimizing or being more efficient in these processes. Those are the things you need to do to get through the process quicker.
Well, let's talk about even the bigger picture, the standardization topic, because it picks up on something we talked about on the stage last year, which is the concept, and bear with me here if this is a little hard to describe. So there's a mentality that I've heard, several of you have talked with me about it, that there's a difference between the pioneers and the settlers of an industry, or the inventors and the managers, with the idea that it takes a different kind of person, a kind of approach to pave a new path, to build something brand new. It takes a different kind of person to have that kind of courage and gumption to be able to have success building things that are brand new than it does the kind of person who needs to take something that's already built and grow it and make it commercial. And I may come up with a better example later, but the one that comes to mind immediately is Elon Musk, great inventor, pretty terrible manager, it feels like. So we talked on the stage last year that it's time for those managers to come into parts of the industry and take what has been built with a lot of courage and a lot of risk and really help to grow that. And I guess my question to you is, where are we? Do you agree that transition is needed? And if so, where are we? Are we at the very, very beginning stage of that? Or based on some of the things that we just talked about where you have had some success standardizing some things, are we in the middle? And what do we need next to be able to really help this industry to expand? Because clearly there's tons of organic material out there, literally, and therefore there's a huge opportunity for growth in this industry. How do we capture that? How do we get the standardization? How do we get the commercialization to happen? That was a lot, Randy.
Well, first, I think what Star is doing at BP is a case in point on your pioneer settler. She's taking something and she's bringing it into sort of that next level of evolution for the business. So what she's doing is incredible. From an industry perspective, we see all of the vendors here, and we look at the cycles from 2010. There are a lot of folks here that enabled that growth. You also were talking about this idea that RNG is an overnight success. But I remember when we were building our first project in Los Angeles, and somebody from SoCalGas told us that we could get $20 per MMBTU. I mean, we kind of laughed at them and said, this is absurd. And 10 years later,
because it was so high. Or so
because it
low?
was so low.
Low, thank
No,
you.
high.
All right.
So we
What
went
year was this that
electricity.
you're talking about?
Pardon?
What year are you talking about?
2010.
Okay, okay.
Yes, thanks for dating me. So when you look at the evolution of the industry and the maturity, it does take cycles. It takes cycles of what equipment, what solutions work for biogas upgrading, food waste processing, tank technologies. It doesn't matter. You could need to go through that ebb and flow to find the things that work and then take it to the next level and continue to ratchet up. Now you have BP and Waste Management standardizing designs. I mean, that more or less becomes a standardization for the industry at that point. And so I think that's the maturity that we need to see is these blue chip companies moving into the industry.
All right, so you want more landfills?
I want more blue chips with
I don't think
large,
that's what he was saying.
very, very large
That wasn't
balance
it.
sheets.
No, but it's so true. It's so true. This kind of investment is really, that's a big
It's
part of the change,
critical.
right?
It's an evolution. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at any industry, car industry, we can pick on Elon, there is consolidation that has to happen. And then that begets more growth because now you have strong balance sheets. They know how to build projects, execute, and scale. And I think those are really important things for us as an industry.
So for the developers out there and the investors that are out there looking for this, what guidance would you give?
Oh gosh, if I'm the right one with that, but just building a bit on what Ryan was saying, I mean, I really do think we're a case study for what you were talking about, Patrick. I mean,
Archaea is?
Yeah, Archaea is absolutely, because the vision came from the founders, and the idea for the scaling like nobody had done before came from the founders. But with BP coming in, what we really brought is steady capital and an execution machine. And so
How has that changed? How's that changed the business and the approach, right?
Yeah, it has. I mean, we talk about what we call the playbook. So standardization is not just around equipment. It's not just about components. It's about how you execute as well. So, understanding kind of what does the project execution machine look like? What does the engineering look like? What does the construction and commissioning look like? Every one of those stage gates and how you execute it shows up when, who does what when. That playbook and having a team pulling in the same direction is the only way you can scale, scale in a really material way. And so that ability to execute and scale is something that BP is very good at. We've done it in different industries all over the world. And I think we brought that, and the ability that I have, honestly, to pull in resources from BP whenever I need somebody is pretty incredible. So whether it's, help with process safety or other kind of aspects of plant design, whether it's help with advocacy in DC, whether it's help with relationships on the interconnect side or the permitting side, these are things that would have been much harder for a startup to do, that somebody with the scale of BP, it's kind of what we do. It's sort of natural business. So I think, you mentioned investors and developers. I think it's staying close to what the market, like you already are, and watching those players that are ready to make that shift from kind of an idea into an execution play.
So let's talk more nuts and bolts here. You all have made, every one of your companies has made major claims or major commitments, right? Ryan, between the massive capital raise that you guys have had, Archaea has made several public announcements on a number of, so you've mentioned some of them up here on stage. Randy, you too, your companies have talked about the dozens of facilities that you have there, big investment numbers, big dreams, real dreams. Let's talk more nuts and bolts. What are the challenges that you all are facing to follow through on those claims? Because especially when you're public, you don't just have the eyes of the public, you've got the eyes of the investors on you, and you need to follow through with those, right? And you're all responsible. How are you dealing with those challenges on execution?
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Okay.
I mean, there's a few, right? I mean, the biggest challenges we have, and I already hit on one of them, was permitting and interconnects. For those of you that are pipeline people that are here, we'll help. It takes a while to get some of these pipeline interconnects done. From the power industry, getting electrical interconnects is starting to become a challenge, because when you're building larger facilities, they have greater needs for power, and sometimes you need substations built to support them.
I thought the electric interconnects were the easy ones.
It used to be, yeah.
What changed?
I think there's a lot of demands on the grid today, as we keep hearing all over the news.
More grid management for all
And-
kinds of reasons.
Exactly, and that's one of the challenges. And so we try to work with, and that's one of the things everybody in this room should be doing. Y'all should be educating the different utilities that you're working with, and trying to make sure that they understand the importance of these projects. And
Is the
sometimes
base load versus intermittent thing, is that a part of that story and that education?
I think so, yeah. And I think also with, supply chain is starting to get better in some cases, but we're struggling on the electrical side on supply chain, transformers and some of the specialized electrical
You
equipment.
mean just the supply of equipment?
Yeah,
Wow.
because, in some cases, you're looking 2 years out on some of those items. So
2 years to buy some equipment for some of your electricity projects?
for the electricity to support our RNG
Ah,
projects.
right, for all the power
Yeah.
demands of the RNG, okay.
And so, you've got to get ahead of that early, and so the way, how do you mitigate that? So you've got to get in early. You've got to make sure that you're getting all your quotes early and that you're ordering as soon as you possibly can in the process. The other area that we really struggle with, though, is permitting. And I'm not just talking about air permitting. Air permitting is kind of one thing, and there's a couple of states that are tougher than others, but getting building permits for a lot of these projects can be a very convoluted process.
Really, so building structures on a landfill property?
Exactly.
The building permits are a challenge?
Building
Yes.
permits are a challenge.
What?
For all
My
of us.
gosh.
And we find ourselves in some of the permitting agencies that we work with, they don't know what RNG is. They haven't had an RNG plant in their community. And so they have lots of questions and they want to have lots of meetings around it. So you've got to come in with your full, education session and really try to educate them and bring examples of projects that you've done, and continue to just educate. And then you've got to be a thorn in their side to continue to try to push that permit forward.
Man,
And those are some of the, I would say, the largest challenges that we're having. The last one I would mention is just, record inflation that we've seen over the last couple of years. I think I get a lot of nods if I ask most of the people in this room right here, is the plant that you built 2 years ago about 40 to 50% more today than it was 2 years ago? And I think most of you would go, uh-huh. So that's another challenge that we've been facing, and how do we continue to make these projects pencil out?
where are those
amidst
higher
that.
costs coming from?
Everywhere.
Mostly. What?
Everywhere.
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 Yep.
Yeah, and from the building permit perspective, it's municipalities are taxed. They've lost good people who understood the process.
And
how to
taxed
look-
are just overworked?
just
or like-
overworked.
Yeah.
And theoretically overworked. I think they're understaffed. And it's not only understaffed, it's not staffed with folks that understand how to review a new technology, a new approach. And so we've actually changed our entire deployment strategy on how we look at moving into development. Instead of a 2-year
Because you're
cycle.
not just building on like an existing landfill property,
more
like Randy's talking,
greenfield.
you're building greenfield, right?
Correct. So we have land in every market that we're going to FID or make the final investment decision on for the next 2.5 years. We're already permitting in those markets. We're already moving on detailed engineering. We'll take our design all the way to issue for construction so that we can get our building permits before we start purchasing any equipment. And so that process then de-risks, but it requires us to think further ahead, know which markets we want to be in. We can work on interconnects. And so now we talk about development cycles that are 50% because of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And there's cost to that. I mean, you're carrying all these capital costs for another year, and you're not getting to that EBITDA faster.
Yeah, I agree. I think Randy and Ryan covered it. I mean, I think those are all the challenges. And so it's just, how do we as a industry think through the solutions and how we can influence and improve it? Because the challenge of it all, you talk about inflation, labor market in certain states is really kind of gotten out of control. And it's just, how do we address it? And I think it's through, the things I talked about earlier about standardization and how you do it. And then I think it's like Ryan and Randy were saying, you've got to look pretty far ahead to not just your development plan this year, but also several years out, so that you're thinking about your permitting and your interconnect strategy and your equipment sourcing strategy ahead of time. And, we're really focused on building the right partnerships as well. Again, in my previous roles in a different industry, but very much parallel, those partnerships with the supply chain, if you can get them in the right way, they can be really powerful in addressing inflation and helping to mitigate some of the challenges in the industry. And so we're looking to apply that same approach here as we develop R&G, and how do we find the right suppliers to really build that long-term relationship with, so that we work together to help mitigate issues.
Yeah, and from a vendor perspective, when you start construction, shit happens. You have to have the right vendors to get the project over the line.
Yeah.
We have multiple vendors here today. All of us are involved getting projects over the line. So it is absolutely finding the right vendor. So getting through building permits, one thing, and now you're under construction, you know things are going to happen. Do you have a long-term partner by your side to make sure that you're solving those problems? And not only for that project, but for the next 30 projects.
Yeah.
Absolutely critical.
So let's talk about markets, because I know that this is something that's shifting a lot right now. We talked a little bit about RNG and electricity, but what we didn't talk about is the compliance markets, the low clean fuel standard and RFS, if you think of those as compliance markets versus the voluntary market. How are you all viewing those markets? Because it feels like maybe with the exception of Archaea, I believe you've been very heavily invested in the voluntary market for the last several years at least. I think that's different than both of your businesses so far. And so I'm wondering how things look to you, because what I hear is that the compliance markets, the LCFS and the RFS, have been driving project development significantly. There's higher risk, but higher reward there. But when you look at the voluntary market, it's growing, and it's not yet bigger, but the potential of the voluntary market is much larger than the compliance markets, at least as we're seeing them right now. I mean, maybe if we did a national clean fuel standard, or every state had a clean fuel standard, that could potentially change. But generally speaking, my understanding is the voluntary market is bigger, potentially, but it's not there yet. So how do you view, the trying to take advantage of the high risk, high reward compliance markets and the generally longer term agreements in the voluntary space and managing that? What are your views on those markets right now?
Yes, I mean, if you look at BP, and that's, again, I mentioned our trading organization earlier, but that's kind of what that team does. They're very good, quite frankly, at managing risk in markets. And so as we look to, the future, what we want to do with the offtake, that both what we produce from an equity perspective, but also the third party volumes we manage, like Ryan's and others, we're looking to basically shift into positions that help us balance our risk across the full market. So right now, today, as you said, we're heavily weighted towards the voluntary market or the fixed price market. That was done by Heritage Archaea because they needed that steady revenue stream to raise capital. We don't need that anymore. BP's got steady capital. And so it's how do we increase our risk, honestly, on the market side to increase profits and the revenues that we can get from this business. And so we're very much excited about that side of the business, and how do we continue to increase pathways there, which again is why we're so bullish on eRINs, because we want additional pathways so that our trading teams can optimize the offtake in a way that increases value.
So access to capital by the purchase of Archaea by BP has given you the ability to take on the addition, or not just take on the risk, but manage the risk better.
That's right.
That's interesting. How does that impact the folks that don't have the backing of a company like BP? Is it the same thing happening, just at a different scale to manage that risk, do you think?
I mean, you could ask Randy and Ryan.
You contract with BP.
You contract.
I would also say that the other markets, the international markets for compliance, I think are future opportunity. So Japan and Europe, South Korea, obviously Canada, there are larger off-takers that have a different framework than LCFS. I think the dispensing capacity in California is a challenge. Obviously that opening up in other markets changes some of that. From a RIN perspective, we are a D5 RIN, which is sort of this off to the side.
45 cents right now.
Don't even look at it. So we are a pure voluntary market. We think our story sells better into the voluntary market. I think the market is going to end up meeting us where we are, which is everything that we're able to do with RNG, what that unlocks for us upstream is going to change the value of our gas on the back end. Today, we don't necessarily need to have that. It's a fraction of our total economics. It's a very important part, but I do see that over the next 10 years changing significantly.
So we have a little different dynamic at WM, just because we own this large fleet, and so we've got.
How big is your fleet? Yeah.
So
You're talking about fleets of vehicles.
it's kind of a personal question, but no, we've got we have currently over 12,000 vehicles running on CNG today. Our routed fleet is about 15,000 vehicles, so we're starting to close the gap on how many diesels we have left running in our fleet. But
Wow.
we're adding about 1,000 trucks a year, presuming we can get them. There was kind of during the pandemic when the supply chain slowed down, we'd order 2,000 trucks and we might get 200. And so
Wow.
that was a little bit of a challenge and put us behind on our goal, but we see ourselves getting to somewhere between 14 and 15,000 CNG vehicles by 2025, by the end of 2025.
Oh my gosh.
But we're over
And where are you about
12,000
now?
today, and 12,000.
Get to 12,000?
We're over 12,000
Over
today.
12,000.
And then we also own about 200 plus CNG fueling stations as well that we have in our fleet. And so because we've had this availability to this fleet, we have typically been pushing most of our offtake into the RINs market. We have very few voluntary deals. The problem, as you mentioned, it is the risk. And, by the end of 2025 or early 2026, we're going to have 24 operating RNG facilities putting out 28 million MMBTU per year. That will exceed the amount of fleet that we have available. And so we're starting to pivot a little bit more to diversify our portfolio so that we are starting to look at some long-term offtakes, some short-term offtakes, overseas offtakes, and that market is continuing to evolve. But we're pulling all those options into our portfolio. Number one, to help us mitigate the risk, because there's a lot of gas out there that would be at large, and we want to make sure that we protect ourselves from that.
So as we look at the voluntary market and positioning yourselves to take advantage of that, or maybe in your case, getting more engaged in the compliance markets, but I think that's an unusual circumstance, right? Most people are in a compliance market and moving more into the voluntary space, or maybe you started in the voluntary space. If you look at that market to sell your gas into, and then you look at some of the emerging markets like selling your CO2, which I realize is not the methane part of your product, right? But selling your CO2 and going into sustainable aviation fuel, and even selling into the gasoline refineries that are trying to, they need hydrogen. Hydrogen can be made from biogas and decarbonize gasoline as well. Renewable diesels in that category too. Hydrogens in that category. You look at all those different markets. Oh, and we're going to come back to carbon capture and sequestration. That's in the list as well. Do you have a top one? I'm guessing your top one might be carbon capture and sequestration, but is there a top 1, 2, or 3 that you're either looking at right now? Not necessarily, it could be for your business, or you could just see in the industry, these are the ones that I think are going to have the most success. Where voluntary and then all these different emerging markets, where do you think the success is going to be most among those emerging spaces?
So I don't see us building SAF or hydrogen facilities anytime soon. We're happy to supply RNG as a feedstock for those folks, but I don't see that's where we're going to be putting our capital dollars in the near future. I think right now for us, CCS is probably number 1 on the list.
Okay, CCS.
Yep.
What do y'all think?
I mean, for us, so when it comes to SAF or hydrogen, that's more in partnership with our refineries, so more on the bioliquid side of it. So we certainly are doing investment there, and
You've got a whole group there to handle
we
that
do.
stuff.
We have a whole BPR products group, and so there's that work is happening, but it's more on the liquid side rather than on the gas side.
Okay.
So on the gas side, it's more about uses for CO2 for us. So
CO2. Okay.
CO2. So CCS.
CO2 sales. I would say, and I would say that CO2 is separate from CCS because when I think of CO2, I'm thinking of like selling CO2 as a commodity. And when I think of CCS, I think storing the CO2.
So for us, it's both.
Okay.
And, we're planning to drill an appraisal well at our plant in Pennsylvania this year for CCS. So we're certainly looking at CCS, but also looking for use and sales of CO2.
Okay.
For us, it's a question of circularity. So how do you take food in that can't be sold or donated and do something better with it? So we'll talk carbon, but obviously the water, food waste is 85% water. How do we rescue that? How do we rescue the nitrogen? We're talking about carbon. So part of that carbon goes out as methane. And what do you do with the other component? We've had conversations and went through early stages of development. We can take the carbon from our upgrade skid and put it into co-located greenhouses. So those greenhouses are producing food. They're actually trucking carbon dioxide into those facilities. We can provide that carbon that was with the original food and bring it back within that food system. Those same trailers are going to the same folks that we serve, which are mostly retailers across the country. So that food goes back on the shelf, and if it can't be sold, we bring it back and we can do something better. So for us, everything within food and carbon, nitrogen, water is about circularity and driving that story and driving the value.
How are you able to monetize that carbon part of the story? Like who's buying, are you generating
Just
credit?
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because what we can do with our customers on the front end. So if you're Kroger, if you're Owl Delhaize, Albertsons, Target, you're asking for these things from your vendors. And so if we're able to partner with our customers and provide a solution that nobody else in the industry can provide, that is long-term value for our customers, and we'll figure out how to monetize that later.
So it's your customer's ability to say that they're doing better things with their carbon footprint, basically, and their ability to say that that's what's giving you business.
Yeah, so how do they deal with their scope 1 emissions? We can help them solve that problem. We're doing things for them that anaerobic digestion unlocks for us, and eventually that value comes out. I think what's really important when about everything he's doing, integrating his fleets, and what BP's doing, they're creating markets for us. And then we can follow in their footsteps and participate in those markets. So we're not trying to create a market. We're trying to do the right thing for our customers, and eventually those markets come into play. And that's how we've thought about the business for the last 17 years, and most of these things have come true.
What do you all think will happen next with if we look at the carbon markets, we've got this interest from all the food waste generators, right? Because those are mostly your clients, right, Ryan? And so, you're getting that pull from your clients
Correct.
to do better things with their food waste. But now we're talking about carbon capture and sequestration, there's a common theme here of carbon, but a completely different market mechanism here. The American Biogas Council has developed a carbon accounting methodology so that we can count how much the carbon situation is improving for a company based on buying biogas, and trying to figure out, okay, how do we create credits from that? How is the carbon market changing as you're seeing it right now? And I don't mean like philosophically, I mean in terms of it's actually impacting business decisions that you're making. What are the near things that are happening? I mean, Ryan, this is kind of building off of your question, right? Your customers are asking, right? How are the carbon markets changing in a way that is actually tangible for you all now?
I think it's an awareness. I think when we talk about carbon markets, we talk about sequestration, we talk about doing something better with that carbon. I think just being in the conversation, it makes people aware. The GREET models that are out and how we value our gas, I think getting those numbers into the GREET model, so there's already a potential pathway that if we can decarbonize what we're doing, you can value your RNG or your bio or your e-RINs more than they are today. So I think there is a path. If there's another credit trade to be made, that sounds wonderful. We're not going to build that market. It's too complex. It's too large. We really have to focus on solving what we're doing upstream. And I think all of us, and including yourself as an indoctrinated engineer, engineers, I think, look at the problem and say, what is the simplest right solution? And there just is a truth. And we're just building solutions to solve the problem. That's really, and not trying to chase credits and monetize different things, because those things can be fickle. We'll see with an administration change what happens. But one thing I do know is that inflation is driving food prices, energy prices. It drives waste disposal costs, and those are things that we can participate in and underwrite our business and all of the investments that we're making.
Yeah, and I think carbon credits and carbon markets are immature right now, and so I think
They're immature. Right now?
immature, and so I think when it comes to, BP does care a lot about carbon markets and carbon credits for lots of reasons, and we support kind of well-designed carbon credit systems. And I think if you look over at Europe, you can see a bit more maturity in kind of how those systems operate, and so we certainly play in the markets in Europe in that way. But it's developing still in the U.S., and we're very supportive of getting to a more mature place in the U.S. But there's not a solution there yet.
Yeah, and I think the question you asked is how have we changed our business model based on these carbon markets evolving?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is we haven't yet, for us anyway.
Okay.
We're keeping an eye. I mean, I think a lot of us get inundated, with different discussions with third parties about how we can be playing in that space. And I think we're still in the process of evaluating all the opportunities, but we haven't changed our business model over it just yet. Now, I'm not saying it won't change. I'm just saying we're still trying to to Starley's point, the markets are immature and we get inundated with discussions with folks. I think we're still trying to sort it out.
So what changed with carbon capture and sequestration that it has your attention? What's changed in that space? Is it a tax credit that is suddenly more valuable than it was before, or someone who's wanting to pay for the CCS? That I assume that's what's happening. Someone's willing to pay more for that, or there's a value that's being created. What changed recently? I don't think that wasn't on our radar a year or two ago.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of was. I mean, we actually started. We've got a couple of patents that we've gotten, and that we started a couple of years ago.
Okay.
But we weren't sure what we were going to do with it yet, right?
Oh.
And so it's something that we've been thinking about it. I mentioned earlier concerns with CI scores, and I think putting carbon sequestration projects bolted on to our RNG projects will significantly help lower our CI scores. And ultimately, I mean, I think that's the goal for us, was trying to get our CI scores lowered. And then yes, to your point, the tax credits, the market that's starting to open up is starting to make it look like I think we can start making these projects work.
45Q.
Yeah, and they're basically bolt on to our existing RNG facilities.
Because what I've been hearing is that, especially like in the beverage market for CO2, they've been getting but a lot of their CO2 from ethanol facilities. Ethanol facilities, as a part of the process of making ethanol, you have access to CO2 in a form that you can create that like 99.9% purity that the beverage grade industry really needs. And now what I understand is a lot of those ethanol facilities are also interested in CCS because of the ability to take advantage of 45Q. And so the key is your facility over a storage cavern that can be used for CCS, or is it going to be near one of the CO2 pipelines that it sounds like people are building? Because you don't want, if you have your carbon dioxide source needs to be near one of those, right?
Exactly.
So the enough right now, probably landfills are the only thing that are big enough to changes in 2026.
Yes.
I think. And so the ethanol facilities are big enough that they're able to also go into CCS. And now the beverage industry is super concerned about, okay, well, where are we going to get our CO2 from? And is that an opportunity for other biogas systems, especially in 2026 or even beyond? It feels like those things starting to change, but it's all starting with 45Q and the ability to monetize that, right?
I think that's probably the catalyst behind it, was 45Q when they started talking about 45Q a couple of years ago. And then, for us, we've laid out a map of the U.S. and where the better opportunities are for sequestration opportunities. And it just so happens a couple of our landfills have pipelines, CO2 pipelines that run right by the landfill. And so that's an opportunity for us as well. And so we continue to kind of vet this out, and we're kind of dedicating a team to it to see if it's going to be a thing for us. But I strongly believe that you'll be seeing us entering this in the future.
To build on that, I mean, I think the point you made, Patrick's really important, which is, you know, in order to do CCS, you have to have the geology below the plants to make it work, or you have to be near a pipeline. So I don't think it's there's not a one answer on any of this. I think you have to overlay the geography, understand, you know,
The geology.
yeah, the geology. Thank you. And what the right solution is for every plant or every location. And obviously, because of our big oil and gas business, you know, CCS certainly plays in that, and we have a core competence of drilling wells and managing, you know, carbon and geology. So that's a natural application for us, but it has to make sense for the plant given the volumes and the location.
So we brought up 45Q with the carbon dioxide sequestration tax credit, but most people's attention are on the Section 48 guidance from Treasury that we're waiting to come out, 45V on the hydrogen side, 45Z on the production side. We're all waiting for Treasury to put out final guidance. We've all advocated heavily to have them make sure that they do what we think Congress intended in terms of creating these tax credits. Here we have the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest piece of legislation and the most positively, potentially impactful piece of legislation ever for the industry, and not yet usable for most of us. How are you managing that risk? Because currently, and this will be our last question, but as a segue into one of the policy sessions that we're going to get into, so we won't get into the policy because they'll get to do that. How are you managing that risk of not knowing what's going to happen and when that's going to come out, and if it's going to be good or if it's going to be not so great?
So right now, the projects that were not reliant on tax credits to get.
Okay,
And
it's logical.
yep. And so, and I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. There are some projects that would pencil out better if we had those, or there are projects that won't get built if we don't get the clarification that we're looking for. But that's generally our strategy.
I think, out of curiosity, how many folks in this room are relying on monetizing ITC?
Anyone relying on the ITC?
Everybody's hand should be raised, because every equipment vendor here, everybody involved, Randy just said it, it's the same for us. If we can't monetize ITC, we're not buying equipment. We're not building projects. We need ITC. And so for us, we have bankers. And so within the bulge bracket that are trying to build those markets, we're starting to create those pathways now. It's a pretty thin markets that Morgan Stanley are not entering. We don't have the balance sheet and the net income to offset with tax credits. We do have to transfer those credits. So it is incredibly important that those markets mature, especially with the change of administration. Coming through the end of 2028, all projects, any legitimate project that I'm aware of, is getting ITC benefit, and we need that to be in place. So a large call out for advocacy and stability within those markets.
Yeah, I think regulatory certainty is good for business, period. And so
That.
having clarity and having a clear path is absolutely what we need. And I would say, you know, part of what we do is manage risk. That's what a company like BP does, and that's all kinds of risk, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's, you know, regulatory, whether it's process safety, whether it's, you know, other types of risk. And so we're comfortable managing risk, but we're certainly, I would agree with both Randy and Ryan that we are advocating for and want the certainty on the regulatory side, and that will support continued investment.
Patrick, you had a chart with projects that came online, and from 2014 to 2019,
Total
you
projects?
can call it our winter. So what happened between 14 and 19? ITC went away. Projects weren't getting built. And so we're liable to have that happen again if ITC changes more.
Are you talking about the farm-based systems?
I'm talking about like total deployed projects. Nonetheless, there was a gap between 14 to 19, and then you see this large uptick again.
That was the farm-based chart. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So same projects apply to us. I think that's likely to happen if there is a radical change within ITC. That's one.
Yeah, the new farm-based systems. Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. If you all wouldn't mind, please join me in thanking Starlee Sykes from Archaea and Ryan Begin from DeBerg and Randy Beck from WM. So we have a break right now, and the intention is for you all to enjoy the expo. The expo is twice as big as it was in Chicago. I hope you all are able to stay super busy and get lots done this week, and thank you all for being here.